Piers Morgan, who joins me now. Good day, Piers. Late night last night. I bailed at about 9. How long were you going on?
Actually, I wasn't a lot longer than you because I wanted to be fresh as a daisy for the big Ferrari Inquisition.
Here we go.
It's funny you mentioned the word unique because someone was asking me yesterday about Donald Trump, and I said the best description I've ever had of Donald Trump was my daughter when I was walking her to school. She was about 11 at the time, and she said, "Daddy, I keep hearing you tell people in interviews that Donald Trump is a unique character." She said, "Do you think there's such a thing as being too unique?"
Well, she's a very wise young woman, and knowing both her parents, I'm not surprised to hear it. The book, Woke is Dead. Piers Morgan, define woke.
Well, it's interesting because it's gone on a bit of a journey, woke. If you go back to when it originated, it was in Black American music in the 60s, and it was specifically designed in a very laudable way to raise awareness of social and racial injustice. And by that criteria, I would happily hold my hand up and identify as woke. Unfortunately, it got hijacked, like a lot of these things. And in the last, I would say, 10-year period, it became a very different thing. It became a very weird, puritanical, very censorious, fueled by cancel culture ideology, which became the very opposite of liberalism. And I've always identified as socially pretty liberal. I don't like to part myself into left or right politically, but I ran the Daily Mirror for 10 years. If anything, I'd be probably slightly centre-left historically. And I thought, I have nothing in common with this ideology. How have we got to this place? How has the left got so, frankly, insane? And the answer, I think, is fueled a lot by social media. A lot of the tribalism becomes a social media, and it's produced a thinking in people that is the opposite of what this country was built on. This country is built on a bedrock of freedom and democracy, and that should be underpinned by freedom of speech and expression. The ability, as you and I have always had in the 30-odd years we've known each other, the ability to have robust debate, but at the end of it, go and have a pint with each other and no harm done. In the last few years, it's become a much more insidious thing where people have simply refused to tolerate other opinions. And if people have other opinions they don't like, they want to shame them, vilify them, cancel them, and destroy them. And they take great glee in doing it.
When, as leader of the opposition, I asked Sir Keir Starmer, can a woman have a penis? And he was unable to was that sort of peak woke, Piers?
100%, because obviously the correct answer is no. Women do not have penises. And I've had conversations with Ed Davey and with Zach Balansky recently, where I've followed up your brilliant theme of asking that simple, basic biology question, and they both failed the test too, and they're leading political parties in this country. So when I say woke is dead, I make it clear in the book it's not actually dead yet. Rather like weeds in a garden, it's still sprouting occasionally. What is different is the reaction to this stuff. So I'm seeing a real backlash and resistance has been building where the woke weeds rear their head and bang, they get immediately met by the common sense majority who say this is nonsense. And I think, the trans issue for me is quite a key part of the book because it goes to the heart of wokeism and its real fundamental flaw is it denies reality. It's all, you can virtue signal all you want, but you cannot deny actual scientific reality. And, I looked at what happened to someone like J.K. Rowling, for example, in that debate. I don't, she hates me, J.K. Rowling. She's perfectly entitled to it.
She's not alone there, Piers. Many of us do.
Exactly. There's a long and illustrious list. But, it's a very frosty relationship we have. In fact, not relationship at all. But I've defended her steadfastly over this issue because I never saw somebody who was transphobic, who hated trans people. I saw somebody who wanted to protect women's rights. And the reality of, say, trans athletes in sport, for example, people will look back in 20 years' time and think, how on earth was this even a debate? How could you allow biological males to compete against women in sport when it was so obviously against the fundamental rights to fairness and equality and safety of women competing in sport? And I think that, this is what I mean about this period being slightly insane, but happily, I think the common sense cavalry is coming.
You mentioned your daughter's view. Woke is dead. How much is President Trump? How much is he one of the executioners, Piers?
Well, you know what? I think that the thing about Trump is that there was a recent poll in The Economist saying that UK people predominantly don't really like Trump himself, but they're gravitating more and more to Trumpism. And by that, if you actually cut through all the rhetoric with Trump, which often is deliberately inflammatory, and look, he's a very unique character, as I've said earlier, but if you cut through all the rhetoric and you actually focus on what he stands for, a lot of British people would nod in agreement. He wants a strong border. Well, we would all like that right now. He wants tougher anti-serious crime policies. We'd all agree with that. He wants fewer engagement in foreign wars. I think we'd all agree with that. He wants people to pay less tax and so on. There are a lot of fundamentals about Trump which strike me as basic common sense. And when he got re-elected, I felt that was a pivotal repudiation of wokeism. And the Democratic Party in America now is polling at record lows because they lassoed themselves wholeheartedly to all this woke nonsense. And Trump just stood there and went, well, if I'm president again, I am not going to allow trans women to compete in women's sport. End. No debate, no ambiguity. Bang, it's not going to happen. And he did that with a number of other issues. And I think a lot of Americans went, you know what? I think that even if you want to hold your nose, the guy's got a point. He speaks common sense.
Lastly, I've got to let go in a minute, but you make some serious points. But as ever with you, there is a light-hearted tone to this as well. So perhaps somebody who wants something for a Christmas stocking filler, give us some of the humorous moments that are in the book so they know that there's levity as well.
There's a lot of levity, and not least involving Donald Trump. And I tell the story of my first interview for Piers Morgan Uncensored. So it was a massive build-up, huge publicity everywhere, in America, in England, everywhere else. And my big get was President Trump at Mar-A-Lago. And I was quite surprised because for the previous year, I'd given him a bit of a hard time over things like saying you should inject yourself with bleach to cure coronavirus. That led to him unfollowing me on Twitter, which was quite painful because he only followed 50 accounts and half of them were companies. And I was the only English person, or the only British person. So that was a bit of a blow. But then also I hammered him over refusing to accept the result of the election and over the January 6th riots. So I was surprised. Anyway, he was at Mar-A-Lago. I turn up. We're about to go and do the interview. I'm suited, booted, made up, talking to the Secret Service. Everyone loves me. And then someone comes to me with a load of paper in their hand and said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? They said, this. And it was 3 pages of the worst things I'd said about Trump in the previous 12 months, beautifully collated by somebody who wanted to bury this interview. And in the middle of it, oddly, were 2 positive quotes about Trump by somebody called Nigel Farage. So I checked Mr. Farage's Twitter account, and sure enough, he'd been at Mar-a-Lago 2 days earlier having dinner with President Trump, and had clearly decided that, contrary to when he got an interview with Trump 3 months earlier, and I texted him to congratulate him, Mr. Farage was going to ruin my interview with President Trump, and that's what he tried to do. And it cut to a meeting in Trump's office where he was basically like Al Pacino and The Godfather, staring at me with murder in his eyes, ranting about all these things I said, which were, I have to admit, pretty critical. He said, did you really call me a mob boss? Did you really say I should never be allowed to run for public office again? And he went on and on and on. And then I had one of those beautiful moments. And you, as one of the great tap dancers in Fleet Street history, Nick Ferrari, will, I think, appreciate this. Right. I said, well, hang on. He was like, he said, I'm not going to do this interview. I said, well, hang on. There is some good stuff I want to talk about. And he said, well, like what? I said, well, like your hole-in-one last week at golf. And he went, you know about this? And thank God for Ernie Els, the South African golfer. Because that morning in the Palm Beach Gazette, he'd given an interview in which he talked about playing with Trump the week before. Trump got a hole-in-one. And Ernie said not only was it one of the best holes-in-one he'd seen, but that Trump was the best presidential golfer he'd ever played with. And I told Trump this, and his whole mood changed. He went, all right, he said, I don't know why, but let's do the interview. Thank you, Ernie.
Well, if I'm a tap dancer, you're the leader of the orchestra. Piers, great having you on the show. The book, Woke is Dead, How Common Sense Triumphed in an Age of Total Madness. Piers Morgan